Hello, health champions. Today we're going to talk about some of the worst advice for fatty liver that people are getting even to this day. So one thing people are being told for fatty liver is that you should eat frequent small meals. Now, the problem is that if you have a fatty liver, you are already insulin resistant. And if you eat frequent meals, now you're getting frequent insulin spikes because every time you eat, your body has to release some insulin. So if you're insulin resistant, you eat frequently, now you're further promoting more insulin resistance, and this insulin promotes fat storage. That's what insulin does. It's one of the things insulin does. It stores fat and it prevents fat burning. And that's, of course, the thing that you're trying to do is you're trying to get that fat burned out of the liver. You're trying to metabolize that fat, but with high levels of insulin, that becomes virtually impossible. And with frequent meals, there is almost never any time where insulin drops where you could burn that out. So frequent meals means that you can never really do anything about that fatty liver. And I did another video on fatty liver a couple of years ago, and I got a lot of comments. So I want to mix in some of these comments as they relate to the things we talk about. So one viewer commented on a previous video and said that when they took their fatty liver to their doctor, they were told to eat 5 times a day, otherwise you will overeat. And this patient had learned some things by then, and the frequent meals didn't make any sense. So instead, she said that I did intermittent fasting and low carb. And she said that for her, on that regimen, she had no cravings. She reversed her disease, which was fatty liver and high blood pressure. And after that, she went off all medications. So again, as we give these examples, it doesn't mean that it's going to work like that for everybody because we're all different. But we need to understand these mechanisms so we can figure out what's going to work for us. And when we talk about fatty liver, it's usually called NAFLD, meaning non-alcoholic fatty liver. And why do they call it that? Because the liver is overloaded. And it used to be that they just called it fatty liver disease, and that was caused by alcohol. But today, most of the fatty livers are not associated with alcohol. We've done something else. We've developed something new that is far worse than alcohol in the frequency and the prevalence of the damage that it's doing. And the number one factor here is called fructose, because these two substances, alcohol and fructose, are the two worst things for the liver. And why is that? They're relatively natural substances. In small amounts, the liver can process and deal with it, no big problem. But in large quantities, they create huge problems for the liver because the liver is the only place that can process these two types of molecules. So we consume them, and you have 150, maybe 200 pounds of body weight that can consume glucose, but only that little 3-pound blob called the liver can process through these. So that means that the chance of overwhelming the liver is far greater with these two things than anything else that you eat. And the other big factor for fatty liver today is insulin, that also causes insulin resistance. Between fructose and insulin, that is where we get the insulin resistance and the fatty liver. And the problem here is that this becomes a vicious cycle, that insulin resistance causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but then this fatty liver creates problem on its own. So it creates inflammation, it changes metabolic signaling and so forth. So now the fatty liver makes the insulin resistance worse. So now we're stuck in this vicious cycle unless we do something to address the root causes, which is we put too much of alcohol and or fructose and too much food stimulating insulin. So if we want to break that vicious cycle, now we have to start reducing these three factors. And if you're wondering how big a deal this insulin and fructose is, it used to be the only fatty liver was caused by alcohol. But today, the alcohol fatty liver is only 10 to 25% of all fatty livers, whereas the insulin resistance fatty liver is 75 to 90%. And the reason these ranges are so wide and so non-specific is, of course, that some people who drink also eat sugar and vice versa. But the vast majority of fatty liver today is caused by fructose and things that stimulate insulin. And keep that in mind, because you wouldn't feed your 8-year-old a bunch of vodka. You would not saturate your child's liver with alcohol. So why do you do it with fructose and things that drive insulin? The next piece of bad advice people are getting from their doctors and their nutritionists is to eat low fat, high carb if you have a fatty liver. And here basically we as humans, we're stuck in primitive thinking. We're thinking that if the problem is fat in the liver, then that fat must come from fat we eat. So solution is to eat less fat. But these are very, very outdated ideas. And anyone with an education and the slightest amount of biochemistry or physiology should know that that's not how it works. If you eat a fatty steak that has a bunch of saturated fat, it's not because that cow ate a bunch of saturated fat. The cow ate grass, if it ate what it was supposed to eat, and it developed the appropriate tissue balance of protein and fat in its body. And in humans, most of the fat that we store is stored by insulin. And insulin is triggered by carbohydrates. So the vast majority of the food that stores fat on your body is not fat, but it's carbohydrates. And especially the ones that we talked about, the sugars and the starches that drive insulin, and then the fructose that clogs up the liver. And furthermore, what insulin does is it gives you cravings. Because it's fat storing and it blocks fat burning, you can't retrieve the fat that you have stored if your insulin levels are high. And if you can't retrieve it, now you get more hungry, you get more cravings, which lead to overeating, which of course now you're stuffing your liver with even more stuff. And this is especially true if you eat processed foods. If you eat low fat, high carb, and it's processed, that's the absolute worst. But if you already have a fatty liver, if you're already insulin resistant, now even whole grains, whole foods, unprocessed foods still have probably way more starch and way more carbohydrates than your body can handle at that point. And especially if you're trying to reverse something, you have to take down your carb intake much more than if you're just trying to maintain a balanced level. And I had a viewer comment on this. She went to her doctor and she said that she had a fatty liver, and because she had a bad gallbladder that basically wasn't kicking out any bile, the doctor said to eat a low-fat, high-carb diet. And again, even with the gallbladder, that didn't make sense to this viewer. So she said, no, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to do low-carb, high-fat. I'm going to eat real food. Then 6 months later, she went back to the doctor. They did a CT scan. And now what they found is she had a completely normal image of the liver. She had normal gallbladder function, and her liver enzymes, which have been high, were now in the normal range. And now if you try to imagine yourself in that situation, you have just turned your health around. You found something that made sense, it seemed to work, and then 6 months later, you have transformed your health. You're so excited that you want to tell somebody. So you go tell this doctor what you have done, and then of course, if that doctor is not very happy, you're shocked. It's like, why would they not want to know what I did to reverse this? But the problem is that most people, most doctors have so much invested in their belief system, in their routines, that it takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of courage to change that. So instead of being happy and excited and wanting to learn, this doctor completely shut down the patient and did not want to know anything about what she had done with her diet. Next piece of bad advice we get for fatty liver is to avoid saturated fats. And I'm not saying that saturated fats is all you could eat, but you don't have to be afraid of them. As long as you eat good, healthy foods in a good balance with saturated and monounsaturated, olive oil, coconut oil, etc., you will be okay. But instead, they tell you to eat vegetable oil. And of course, there's no such thing as vegetable oil because vegetables are extremely low fat. So what they're talking about are things like soybean oil and canola oil, corn oil, safflower oil, etc. And what I cringe at is when you read a label and then they say they put certain things in and then at the end it says and or. How can you not know which one you put in there? How can it even be close to legal to have labels like that where they don't even tell you it's whatever was the cheapest that month? Is that what it means? I don't know. I don't need to tell you to avoid all kinds of products like that. But what most of these so-called vegetable oils have in common is that their omega-6 to omega-3 ratios is usually very, very high. For some of them, it's as high as 20:1, and that is a pro-inflammatory ratio. So when we eat a lot of these oils and we push our fatty acid ratio that much out of balance, that's a pro-inflammatory state. But furthermore, these oils are also very, very harshly processed. They're highly oxidized. They produce a lot of free radicals. They're very unstable. They process them with high heat and high pressure to the point where they even alter the molecular structure. And that matters a lot because you have enzymes that fit like little keys into each and every molecule. That's how you take them apart and use them for fuel or body building blocks. But when they process them that harshly and they change molecular structure, you don't have the enzymes to take them apart, and instead they become foreign substances and toxins. And in the process, they destroy these oils so that they stink and they taste horrible. So now they have to degum them and deodorize them to get rid of all those unpleasant flavors. And very often they even use solvents to extract that last little bit of oil from it, because corn, for example, is not very high fat. It's only a few percent fat to start with. So it's not like you just squeeze an olive and the oil comes out. With corn, you can't do that. You need to use solvents. And very often there is residue of these solvents in there. So it's like you get hexane or acetone in your oils, but because it's not an ingredient, they don't have to put it on the label. It was just part of the production, so they don't have to tell you how much of that is still in the product. And all of these factors put together means that these oils actually promote inflammation, they promote insulin resistance and fatty liver, which is the exact opposite of what we're trying to accomplish. And some more bad advice for fatty liver is to look for products that are low calorie, that are sugar-free, that are low fat or reduced calorie, that are low glycemic. And it's not that low glycemic is bad, but how did they get there? Okay, so for example, a lot of these products are promoted as heart healthy. And what it often means is that they process them in a way that's very unnatural to get to that state, to get these properties. And if they're sugar-free, very often they will have artificial sweeteners in them. They'll have aspartame, they'll have sucralose, acesulfame, potassium, which are horrendous toxins for your body. But then there are other things that are almost universally promoted as health food, like agave syrup or agave nectar that they sell in health food stores, and almost universally people believe this to be a health product, when in fact a lot of agave will have as much as 80% fructose. It's like the ultimate high fructose corn syrup. And then we have low-fat products. And I'm not talking about leafy greens that are naturally low-fat. I'm talking about products that normally get their character from the fats. We're talking about sour cream and mayonnaise and salad dressing, that you eat them because they have fat. They give you that rich feeling, that full flavor. And now if they create a low-fat or a non-fat version, you have to ask yourself, if they took out the fat, which was almost what that product was all about, now what's in there instead? What is that product? And the answer is it's a bunch of chemicals and harshly processed foods that you don't want. So some examples would be modified cornstarch, maltodextrin, mono and diglycerides, polysorbate 80, and this list could be hundreds of items long, but what they all have in common is that they're chemicals that don't belong in your body. And then of course, because the original product got all of its flavor from fat, now this product doesn't taste anything, so now you have to add back flavor in the form of artificial flavors and chemicals. And you gotta love this when the doctor tells you, just eat fewer calories, right? Why didn't you think of that? Well, that argument, it ignores the hormonal effects of food. That it's not the calories, it's what happens in your body, what pathways, what breakdown, what metabolism, what storage processes result of the hormones and the food that you eat. And if you already don't eat a lot of really good, healthy, natural foods, and then you just try to eat less of it, that means you probably end up with some nutritional deficiencies because you already ate depleted food and now you just eat even less of it. But the biggest problem with that idea is that it causes suffering. You get hungry, you get cranky, you get cravings, and if you're suffering, it's not sustainable. Nobody can maintain that year after year after year. And as a result, suffering always fails and you go back to the bad habits that caused the problem in the first place. So another viewer went to the doctor with a fatty liver and he had really high liver enzymes. So these are released into the bloodstream. They're supposed to be inside liver cells and only a small amount gets into the bloodstream when cells break, when you have a normal turnover of these liver cells. But if your liver is in distress, if it's starting to get inflammation and a huge turnover of these cells, then these numbers go up. So they're supposed to be in the 20s up to maybe 30, and his numbers were in the hundreds. So he got real scared and he asked his doctor, what can I do about this? Is there any way to reverse this? And the doctor was actually informed and he said, you could stop eating sugar, but you won't. Isn't that sad that they've already made up their mind, that they know, some of the doctors know that there is a solution, but they assume that people will not follow through. But this viewer must have had a mindset that was a little better than average because he simply said, I'll see you in 90 days. And then he did all the things I talk about in my videos, and 90 days later, his liver enzymes, AST, ALT, were in the normal range again. So the tragedy is that very few doctors know the correct action, but even the ones who do hesitate to tell patients because they assume people won't follow through. There's so few people that follow through that why bother telling anybody? And I believe that's because there's so much confusion out there. People are drawn in so many different directions. There's so many opinions and everybody wants a quick fix. Nobody wants to really sit down and understand the issues. And if you're confused, then you're not going to take consistent action. You're going to try this and try that, and you're going to pop around between different things, and you never stick to something long enough to get the results. But that's why I do the videos the way that I do, and that's why I'm so excited to be talking to you, because I know that you are a health champion, that you don't look for the quick fix. You look for an understanding so that you can take charge. And I know this is going to shock you because you probably watched this video from beginning to end, but the average person, their attention span is so short that on a 25-minute video, they watch about 7 or 8 minutes. And believe it or not, for this type of video, that's a lot. Most videos like this don't even get close to that kind of view time. But that's why I'm so committed to making videos like this, so that we can create a community of health champions where people really start understanding what's going on, so that we can get empowerment out on a wider level. And by really learning and understanding these things and telling others and giving testimonials in the comments, you help spread the message and you help empower others as well. Some more bad advice that people are told is to eat more fruit. And it's not because fruit is a bad thing that it's bad advice. It's because modern fruit is so much sweeter than fruit used to be. We have access 365 days a year to all the tropical fruits from every corner of the world, and that's not natural for our bodies. But if we have a fatty liver, now we have lost the ability to process carbohydrates properly. So even if that was okay 10 years ago, it's not okay once you have a fatty liver. People are also told that not just fruit is okay, but juices and smoothies are fine. Now the problem is that we're getting concentrated forms of fructose and sucrose and glucose in all that fruit. So what you can do is you could use a little bit of berries. You could use berries in moderation, because berries have less sugar and more fiber. So doing a handful of those is okay, even if you're a diabetic, even if you have a fatty liver. But more fruit is not better, and not in the form of juice or smoothies. Now, I do make smoothies from time to time, but I don't make them all sugary and sweet, because you can make a smoothie with nuts and seeds and avocado and veggies, and you can put heavy cream in there. You can put some coconut cream. You can sweeten it with stevia and flavor it with cocoa powder. So you can make a chocolate smoothie with nuts and seeds, and it's delicious, especially if you try to balance out the stevia and the cocoa with a bit of salt. You can get a really nice smoothie that works even on a keto diet. Another viewer comment from that previous video I made was that his biggest moment was when he realized that the advice given was the exact opposite of what you want to do to get rid of a fatty liver. And he said, I got rid of my pregnant look, you know what he's talking about, and he ate fatty meat and cruciferous greens and vegetables. And if you base your food on that, even if you eat a lot of leafy greens and a lot of cruciferous non-starchy greens, you can actually be in keto. It doesn't mean that you eat cheese crisps and butter all the time. You can eat real food with lots of fiber, lots of greens, and have a ketogenic diet like he did. And he said he did a 19-5 intermittent fasting pattern. He ate twice a day, 5 hours apart, and he lost 103 pounds. He reversed his prediabetes, but most importantly, he developed a lifestyle so that 2 years later, he was still successful. And he finished his comment saying, all thanks to the correct information. But you have to take the time to develop an understanding so that you can tell what's confusing and what's consistent. Next piece of bad advice is to take a statin if you have a fatty liver. And that's not saying that no one ever should take a statin, but just because you have a fatty liver is really not a good reason. But some figure that all of these things are associated, that if you have a metabolic syndrome with high blood pressure and high blood sugar and high insulin, then you have a fatty liver and you probably have high cholesterol. So let's just take a statin while we're at it. And again, I'm not saying that no one should ever be on a statin, but if you have a fatty liver or your total cholesterol is 201, those are not good reasons to take a statin medication. You have to understand what's going on with you, and you must address the root cause in your case. So what happens when you take a statin, especially for the wrong reasons, now this statin will block your production of CoQ10. And CoQ10 is an enzyme that the body uses to make energy. And this is part of the same metabolic manufacturing pathway as cholesterol. So when you take a medication like a statin that will shut off or block at least part of that pathway, not only are you shutting down the cholesterol production, but you're also shutting down your production of CoQ10. And as a result, you will, to that degree that you shut down that pathway, you will shut down your production of energy, your production of ATP, which is the currency that every cell in your body uses to make energy. And as a result, you dramatically reduce the amount of energy or ATP produced in your body. And where does this hit the hardest? In the organs, in the tissues that use the most energy. If they're super dependent on energy and you shut down that production, then those organs are going to lose proportionately more. So the brain, the heart, the liver, and the kidneys, rather important organs, wouldn't you say, those are the hardest hit. So if you have a fatty liver and you're trying to help that liver clean up and metabolize that fat, you want to give it resources. You want to take away the interfering factors like sugar and insulin and alcohol, and maybe supply some nutrients. But you don't want to shut down the energy production in that liver. How is it supposed to heal and clean itself out and burn through that fat if it doesn't get any energy? And I made several other videos where I show you how to take care of your liver, how to clean it and support it and detoxify it, etc. So if you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master your health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.